Let's talk first on the line to Lorrae Yarderberg, who is co-managing director of Yarderberg Crate, which is an educational consultancy. Lorrae, hello.
Good evening, Clive.
Thank you for joining us. So do you think this is hypocritical or perfectly fine for him to do this?
I think that none of us are qualified to say whether Prime Minister and his wife should send their children to school, because really, as parents, they are the most qualified to do that. You know, as educational consultants, we advise hundreds of parents on on schools. But ultimately, there is no one better qualified than the children's parents to make that decision based on the facts. I mean, in this situation, you cannot send your child to somewhere like Collett Court unless they're bright. So one would assume that the Camerons have had their child assessed, that they know how bright he is, and now they're starting to make some considered decisions about his schooling based on that fact, which they probably didn't know 7 years ago when he made some of the comments he made. I think this happens to lots of parents. They really don't know beforehand until the time comes. And then you have to be realistic, and it's not about politics, it's about what is in the best interest of that child.
Well, of course, and yes, every parent should have the best interest of their child at heart. But then you would say, well, why did he make these comments then? Don't promise one thing and then do something else.
Well, I think that's a very reasonable thing to say, actually. And I think he probably does regret that, because ultimately, if you're using the criteria, where's my child going to thrive, where's my child going to be happy, where's it going to reach his full potential, then you wouldn't make a comment like that, because there are excellent state schools and there are excellent independent schools, and ultimately you have to make the choice that's best for your child.
Thing is, can you ever know? I mean, if your choice is between a paid-for private school and being the Prime Minister, probably a pretty good state school as well, are we ever going to know what's the right decision for your child? You're going to do pretty well in either of those categories, I would have thought.
Well, I don't agree with you, because actually the criteria for entry into a state school is very specific. And, you have to look at those criteria, and he may be just looking at all of the options at the moment and saying, well, actually, I'm not sure we meet the criteria for the state school of our choice. And so he's looking at the independent options as well, which is what we would always advise parents to do.
So what sort of criteria do you mean, like living in the catchment area, that sort of thing?
Yes, exactly. Living in the catchment area, but then also having this additional aspect, which might be that the child is very bright, and looking at, well, which state schools could he potentially go to through selection, for example. And we've seen examples of that in the past with other Prime Ministers' children. So he is fair in doing that and looking at his options.
So do you think possibly the state school options aren't catering very well for bright pupils?
I think that's a different issue, and of course that is a political issue. And I think there's a range of very, very good state schools and also some that do not cater as well. And that's something, obviously, that is in the political arena.
Yeah, but I mean, when you're saying you make a decision because your child is bright,
Yes.
That would suggest, well, your private school's going to be better for a brighter pupil.
No, not at all. Not at all. In fact, the parents we work with would look at both. They'd always look at state selective schools and independent schools, and they would try for both.
Right.
So
And what are they getting for their money, do you think? Do you actually get a better education, a better kind of education, a different kind? What are you actually buying?
I think you are getting a different education. There's a range here to consider. Often we look at parents' cultural background, and in this case, the Camerons have got their own cultural background. I mean, David Cameron went to Eton, his wife went to Marlborough. They have a cultural background of independent schools. So in the normal run of things, parents of that type of background may well be looking at independent schools as well as state selectives. And often they do choose a state selective school above an independent school in that situation.
It has been suggested, though, that if all MPs had to send their children to state school, then maybe the standards of state schools would magically improve because they'd actually be the customers.
I think you're probably right.
Good. OK, we'll agree on that. Lorrae, great to talk to you. Thank you very much for that.